We are privileged to have with us today Dr. Mala Ramanathan, who is a statistician, demographer with training in medical anthropology and bioethics. She's currently a faculty member of the Achutha Menon Center for Health Science Studies, SCTIMST, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. She is a member of the Ethics Committee of the Institute for Research in Medical Statistics, ICMR, New Delhi, and Health Action by People, Thiruvananthapuram. Her current focus of work is maternal and child health, gender and chronic morbidity, with special reference to diabetes mellitus and ethics in health research. She's on the editorial board of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, an indexed peer-reviewed journal of the Forum for Medical Ethics Society, Mumbai. Dr. Ramanathan has several publications, including papers, book reports, and chapters related to areas of her interest. May I now request all of you to welcome Dr. Ramanathan. Dr. Ramanathan, please.
Good evening, and it's a privilege to be here, to be talking about, and I would have rather not talked about her, but have her around. But it's a privilege that to be able to stand here and share a few words about my professional affiliation with Malavika, which is about 8 to 9 years now. And I'm really very happy to be here and particularly thankful to Dr. Deepak Singhania for organizing it and her students for facilitating this process of remembering Malavika with joy and the work that she did, sharing it with others, retelling those stories, because when we retell the stories, we let it go more far and wide and remember with pleasure and with a certain smile on our faces. And I think I am also going to try to do just that, because as Dr. Menon said, I knew Malavika professionally, and I have to tell her parents, I didn't know that she could dance so beautifully. I never knew. What I did know was that we shared a common love for different kinds of rare Tamilian dishes, which took us back in memory to our childhood. And a lot of that you have actually brought back to me from my childhood when I visited Bangalore to work with her all those 4 years ago. And what I'm going to talk today, though I would love to talk about the food part, is the work that I did with Malavika. And I want to emphasize particularly on an academic singular contribution that she had started to make, which I noticed because it's one of my fortes and it's a rare thing in public health. And I'm hoping that her legacy enables us to take that particular aspect of her work. And I see all her students around, and I hope it lives, it thrives. And, you know, we will remember Malavika 10 years down the road for this particularly singular contribution that she has started in research in public health. I met her at a conference. I had corresponded with her, but I think it was 2012 or 13, because one doesn't remember specific years when one keeps attending weird conferences all over the place. So this was some conference at the Institute for Economic Growth in Delhi, North Delhi, where we were sitting in, as usual, as women are wont to be, in the second row, not the first row, and whispering to each other, even though we didn't know each other very well, about some presentation which ignored a gender aspect, which troubled both of us. And we could, just by making eye contact, you know, immediately recognize kindred souls to, what shall I call, backbite over the absence of gender lens. And that was the start of the conversation with her. And I found that she was working with another colleague of mine, and we did an evaluation of the Mehtari Jatan program of the government of Chhattisgarh subsequently. And I will tell you a little bit about that, because this particular program, its success was in the HMIS data already. But what they wanted to know was its processes, which is what her students have talked about extensively. And so we were out there in the villages looking at Anganwadis, who comes to eat, what do they like to eat, what do they not like about the stuff, what incentivizes them, and what prevents them from coming to. This was the hot cooked meal for pregnant women. And then I came down, I had been coming to IIT Gandhinagar as part of their ethics committee sometime in the historical, maybe 10 years or something. But I barely knew Malavika. I was helping a wee bit by facilitating the SOPs, by sharing SOPs from my institute. And I came down here to facilitate the training, or something of a training of trainers for the ICDS project, which was getting started then. And that was my original role. But for those of you who know qualitative research, it's an iterative process where the analysis of incoming data facilitates the ongoing research process. So rough and ready analysis has to be done before you move to other states to see what the changing focuses should be. So that is where I went to Bangalore and met her mother and stayed there to do the work. And then the more recent engagement was reviewing her student's PhD thesis as an external examiner. And posthumously, the one piece of work that I did was being the working editor, the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. I'm a working editor of it, and we get papers which are sent. We lead it's like the editor in the +1. We lead it, we recommend reviewers, we collect the reviews, we collate it, send it back and judge it, and we shepherd the paper through to publication. And so I reviewed her work, but I didn't know it was her, because the paper was circulated to us with the name of her student's surname. And so only when the galley proof came, we knew that Malavika was, and that was very embarrassing for me, because I had to write to the editor and give an explanation as to why I don't have any conflict of interest, because I didn't know that Malavika was an author of the paper. So I am the named working editor on it, because I didn't know that she was author of that paper. So in Chhattisgarh, we were in the Mehtari Jatan. One thing which we shared in common is we would go from Anganwadis to a few homes around to get an understanding of using what anthropologists call participant observation. So we would just walk into homes, invariably sit on the floor and start chatting with the women in that house. And we found stacked THR rations, in that green or different colored bags in a corner. And we found ways and means to, poke our noses into what happens to them. Very revealing, but Malavika and I had done that, bending our heads through the houses. In Chhattisgarh, the chowkat is small. So, while I am not very tall, but Malavika could go through, I couldn't. We had to jump over the chowkat, go in, but we'd sit there in the kitchens and in their homes on the floor, saying no, people would come inevitably offering chairs. We would sit there. We found out quite a lot in that expeditions. But what I realized is she was the PI of some projects. But when we went to the field, she was an investigator. I mean, there was none of that PI-ness about her. She would be with her students doing her data collection. And, she wore Western clothes at times. And let me be honest, I would be very scared because one of our training tells us that we have to look like the community. But she had the phenomenal ability to dissemble in that community, meaning it didn't matter what she wore. She could sit on the floor cross-legged and gossip with them without, speaking the exact Hindi back at them. And that, asking, nodding head and asking questions, whispering with me and carrying that conversation and connecting with those women, the Anganwadi workers. And that was my experience of the work in Mehtari Jatan. The ICDS project was my main role was training the researchers. But subsequently, because this had to be done and a lot, we teach qualitative research globally, nationally as well. But as in my institution, as it is in most institutions, we teach the methods of data collection. We don't teach the process of data analysis as effectively. So there were very few people who could do that rough and ready. And so Malavika called me saying this has to be done because we have to revise the tools to go to the other states. So I thought, okay, there was a weekend. I took 2 extra days of earned leave and said, I will somehow sneak out for 4 days, but you have to find me a table and you have to find me as in when I do stuff, someone who will type up the stuff and be just at my beck and call for typing. And in exchange, you have to give me curd rice and pickles. That's all is what I need. So she said, yes, I'll organize your curd rice and pickles, 2 large tables and all the transcripts. And come and do that. So over the next 4 days, I didn't think my typist would be Malavika, but my typist was Malavika. The 2 of us stayed cooped up in one room there with absolute 1 fan, okay, mostly switched off because we would tear up the papers for coding and we didn't want them to fly. Fortunately, it was Bangalore and the switching off of the fan didn't really make a big difference, but we worked. And that is when I understood her transcripts were meticulous. The meanings, when I went back, the translations had their original Gujarati words. She had written them in brackets, so I could go back and forth and understand the underlying meanings attached to it when people explained the burden of work, the Anganwadi workers and helpers. And I have to be honest to tell you something bad. I am obsessive about work when I start. And that is the nature of qualitative research. You imbibe it. You have to soak in it. And you can't come out of it till you've finished. So when I'm in that stage, I'm not a good person. I don't think I'm a good person. But in that situation, I'm a horrible person. In the sense, nothing else I can see but the data, the coding, and the work, maybe eating occasionally and using nature's call kind of stuff. So she stood that. And I didn't know who was in that room. I kept producing, she kept producing back because it's an iterative process in qualitative analysis. I didn't know it was day or night. Only when I had to go to sleep, I would go. And then she would go. We managed it and she worked. She managed to withstand because she disconnected herself from the routine work of IIT, everything else, kept the phone away, and we worked that way to finish. So she could disconnect from work pressure and work. And constantly through that process, we didn't need to tell each other. No, we could, the notes, the transcripts were telling us about the gendered nature of the Anganwadi workers' responsibilities at home. The importance of, we began to recognize the importance of convergence and also the politics of being the women and child department in that process. The power that accrues to a revenue secretary is not the same power that accrues to a woman and child department secretary. And those were the things about convergence, which, are stuff which we understood from those transcripts. And this is the ICDS work where all of us, including Purnima, are named. This is what I talked about. And one of the things we recognized while sifting and identifying was, everyone tells you the story of infrastructural requirements for Anganwadi centers. Those transcripts from Gujarat told us the meaning of the infrastructure, what it means at individual level. It's stuff like, see, if the Anganwadi doesn't have 4 walls, Purnima mentioned the lack of, and the ICDS project report also talks about the supply chain limitation and the lack of storage. It's supposed to be stored in the Anganwadi. If the Anganwadi doesn't have walls or has dampness in it or holes in the windows, the rats come and get the stuff that has come there. So she has to keep it in her house. What happens in the community is people say she takes it home. She doesn't take it home because she wants to feed her children. She takes it home because she's accountable and she needs to keep it safe, and she has nowhere to keep it safe. And what happens is the trust in the Anganwadi is eroded. These were small things which are very crucial, which we understood when we did those transcripts. We understood the relevance of caste. No matter how the Anganwadi worker tries to overcome it at community level, the social determinants, it keeps coming again and again. We recognize the problem of working mothers. It's there in the report for requirement for crushes, but it was very poignant what the women said. The women said, when a child who is eligible for coming to Anganwadi, and there is another younger or older child who is going to get left alone, and that child comes with a brother or sister, how can we not feed that child? And how I have to account, so I can't feed the child, and how can I send the child away? So mothers invariably don't send their children because they have 3 children to feed and only 1 child can come to the Anganwadi. So where do I send the other children? Because she goes for work. So she either leaves them alone or she takes them with her. So that's another reason why children don't go to Anganwadi, not because they don't want to, but because mothers are also egalitarian in their own ways. And that's when we recognize the relevance of crushes. It's in part of the recommendation. And last, it's one of the last things, this PhD work, which brings me to the singular contribution of Malavika's. This thesis had used a range of methods, Ankita Shah's thesis. The first was a mixed method study using an embedded study design where the qualitative study, as she identified people in the quantitative study, they looked at explanations for the quantitative findings, and they actually offer inputs to the key findings, clarity on why nutrition program effect does not yield the benefit it should. The second was a randomized control trial designed to deliver a health promotion curriculum, and it starts by actually developing one. And because it got affected by COVID, it did not demonstrate the as effective, but it would have been very effective because it was very planned with great nuance, using PT teachers to run the training, counting the number of trainings in terms of, it was a classic RCT in using social determinants. The third study looked at how context, this is what Purnima talked about, in markedly homogeneous context can influence nutritional status of adolescents using a multi-level framework, and looked at the salience of the presence of an educated woman in the household. It actually started with a theory-laden model building exercise to establish across 3 areas using multi-method and paradigmatic approach to look at the advantage of using a theory-laden approach to looking at health, education, nutrition, and well-being. And it went on to ground it empirically using these 3 different studies looking at Nancy Krieger's ecosocial theory to develop the models for testing and the interventions. And this is the last piece, which I told you was, to my embarrassment, I had to write that I had no conflict of interest. This is the work, Jagrati Gangopadhyay and Malavika Subramanyam, Theory and Health Disparities, explaining the relevance of theory in public health research in India, actually looking at published research to see how different it would be if a theory had informed it. Looking at a review, address quantitative public health studies do not integrate theoretical considerations. This qualitative study uses content analysis to explore the application of theory in Indian public health articles listed on PubMed. Social determinants such as poverty, income, social class, education, gender, caste, socioeconomic position, socioeconomic status, very rare to make that distinction in the Indian context. Immigrant status and wealth were the key words that were used to identify. And she analyzed these studies to show how different the findings were and how much more grounded they were when they were informed by theory. This is her significant, according to me, contribution that I hope goes on, bringing theory to the pragmatic. See, in public health, we are utilitarian. We want solutions and we want them yesterday. And so we don't have time for theory. We think theory is for the rich. We need to go out there and solve problems for people to live better. And Malavika's work shows us that theory actually enables far more pragmatic solutions to program development in public health. She has systematically, through the work of her students and her own work, demonstrated the value addition to public health considerations that emerge out of bringing theory to practice. Imbibing this understanding to her students who've actually gone out there and applied. I hope it flourishes. I hope that the spirit with which she started that work flourishes with her students who stand here, all of you today, because this is a phenomenal contribution. Something that the public health world as yet doesn't recognize. It should, and its worth is worth gold. Thank you.
Now we have with us Dr. Rajan Shankar, who's going to join us remotely in this memorial series. Before he begins, let me introduce Dr. Shankar to our audience. Dr. Rajan Shankar is a founding director at the India Nutrition Initiative, TINI, and senior advisor for nutrition at the Tata Trust. Prior to joining the trust, Dr. Shankar was country manager, India, and regional representative, South Asia, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, that is GAIN, and supported GAIN's program development and grant management in India. Prior to joining GAIN, Dr. Shankar was a project officer in the Child Development and Nutrition section of UNICEF in India. In 2001, he retired as a colonel from the Army Medical Corps after 24 years of service. He's a graduate in medicine from the University of Madras, with a specialization in internal medicine and endocrinology. He has published over 100 scientific papers in national and international journals. So please welcome Dr. Shankar with a huge round of applause.
At the outset, my sincere apologies that I'm not there in person. I joined this meeting on my behalf and on behalf of all my colleagues from the health and nutrition section of Tata Trust. Malavika was a genuinely warm individual and a great friend of mine. While we mourn the loss of Malavika, we pay tribute and celebrate a life that was well lived, a life committed to science, as many before me very clearly brought out. Not many leave behind a legacy of such dedication and accomplishment. I first contacted Malavika when I read her paper, Is Economic Growth associated with reduction in child undernutrition. When this paper was published, it attracted a lot of attention, because that was a time that India had consistently robust economic growth for over a decade. And it is also the time when a lot more data on child nutrition was available in public domain. And it was generally perceived that economic growth will automatically improve child nutrition. And this paper, Malavika clearly showed, as Purnima was saying, is one of those that are necessary, maybe necessary, but certainly not sufficient. And she showed clearly in that paper that direct investments in appropriate health interventions may be essential to reduce child undernutrition. That interaction with her started my personal friendship with her, and Malavika's continuing support to the programs. At that time, I was working with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, with GAIN, and subsequently with Tata Trust. Then I invited her from the Tata Trust to deliver the first lecture in the series of lectures that we started within the Trust and the Tata Trust ecosystem. And her keynote was on social determinants of health. I must say that this lecture helped a lot of my colleagues to develop a kind of a friendship and depend on Malavika as a mentor for many programs that they conceptualized, implemented, evaluated. And so she was more a mentor for a lot of my colleagues and a lot of the programs that we did. On concrete terms, subsequently, when the Tata Trust launched a major program to support the National Nutrition Mission called the Nutrition Fellowship Program. It's called the Swasth Bharat Prerak Program. We had about 380 young men and women, fresh graduates out of college, working at that many districts, supporting the district administration and implementation of the National Nutrition Mission. Over a 3-year period, we had more than 800 preraks working for varying periods from 12 to 36 months. And we wanted Malavika to take a look at that program, more to say what are the lessons to learn from them, what has been the contribution of preraks to implementation of the National Nutrition Mission. I think along with Malavika and Anupam, Aishwarya, they helped us and they did a detailed formative study. They captured the key learnings and it was very well received by both the Tata Trust and the Ministry of Women and Child Development. Then we requested her to also do a study of the take-home ration models implemented by different states in the country. I think Malavika, along with Anupam and Dimple, they brought together a team and they did detailed qualitative research to understand the different models and how they're being implemented in different parts of the country. And this is a big contribution to understanding the THR landscape in the country. I must admit that she has been a great, these are just 2 examples, but overall she has been a kind of a mentor to our programs. We could reach out to her and ask her for any support for our program evaluation or even in designs. She has been a great influence to our health and nutrition teams at Tata Trust. I, on behalf of my colleagues and on my own behalf, would like to place here on record our gratitude. As many before me said, life can be fleeting, but a life lived to the fullest stays in the fond memories. And I'm sure from what we have heard, and what we have known of her, Malavika's was one. And I just join you all in agreeing that the best that we can do for her is to fully further the scientific rigor and the areas that she dwelled on and did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sankar, for joining us remotely. And finally, we have with us one of the doctoral students of Professor Malavika Subramanyam, Dr. Mukta Gundi. Dr. Gundi is a public health researcher interested in exploring how social conditions influence health. Her interests include understanding how social and gender inequalities intersect to impact adolescents' health indicators. A doctoral student from IIT Gandhinagar, who graduated in August 2020, Dr. Gundi worked as a technical specialist with the Population Council, New Delhi. She co-led baseline data collection for a community-based evaluation program aimed at skilling in-school and out-of-school adolescent girls to reduce the incidences of child marriage in Rajasthan. Her research work included contributing to an evidence synthesis of experimental studies from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa that were aimed at delaying marriage, reducing teenage pregnancy, and improving labor force participation among adolescent girls and young women. She's also co-authored research briefs, analyzed data, designed research tools, and supervised data collection. So please welcome Dr. Mukta Gundi with a huge round of applause.
Thank you, Pankaj, right? Manoj. Thank you, Manoj. This was not needed. You could have just said, Mukta is Malavika student, always. Good evening, everyone. I'm visiting my alma mater for the first time since I submitted my thesis in October 2019. Because of the COVID pandemic, my defense, my graduation happened online. And not even in my worst dreams had I imagined that I would be visiting IIT Gandhinagar for my Dear Professor's Memorial Lecture Series. When I was here as a student from December 2014 to 2019, and even before that, I have worked with Malavika for 2 years. Every single day, I have spoken with her. Today is probably one of the toughest days of my life when I'll be speaking about her, and that too using the past tense. Dr. Purnima has shared, even Dr. Mala ma'am, Dr. Rajan Sankar they have shared Malavika's contribution as a researcher, especially in the field of undernutrition and public health. What I'm going to do today, what I'm going to share today is her contribution as a teacher, as a research mentor in my academic journey. And I'm kind of trying to locate what that contribution means in the journey of public health researcher. I can actually go on speaking about her for several hours, so please pardon me for using this. This is just to support myself so that I stick to time and have a focused sort of speech. As we know, public health has long been dissociated from the public. The pure biomedical approach of looking at people's health outcomes has resulted in solutions that seem to be nicely packaged in programs. But in many ways, several times we realize that they are self-defeating. This is because these biomedical solutions rarely go back to the social, cultural, economic roots of inequalities and injustices that have existed, which continue to exist. This is precisely why we have newer medications coming up for treating diseases, but we fail to address the issues of health equity. We have all new kinds of technologies, apps which can track our moods, but we fail to address the root causes of trauma. We have researchers who present data on, maybe reproductive morbidities among women without really locating these women's health experiences in the social fabric in India. I think this is how my journey began. I was a candidate with a fresh Master of Public Health program, wanting to work with Malavika as a research associate, with quite a narrow understanding of what social epidemiology means. I knew the measures of morbidity and mortality. Of course, I had learned epidemiology in my MPH, but had not quite learned the importance of asking why to the unequal distribution of these morbidities and mortalities in the population. I remember the day in my first semester when she had called me with a kind of conceptual model for my idea of working on menstrual hygiene. My model kind of looked perfect to me. I had all kinds of placeholders in that diagram and that fancy PPT. And I was quite excited about impressing my supervisor in the first semester itself. Malavika patiently listened to me, wholeheartedly appreciated my efforts of putting together that conceptual model. And just looking into my eyes, she asked me, Mukta, you've been saying menstrual hygiene. Do you think menstrual hygiene is a synonym with menstrual health? I fumbled. And I think my journey of exploration began with that question. When I would begin discussing with her, Malavika, this is how I feel I should be doing my data collection in urban and rural Maharashtra, she would make me pause and she would bring me back to the question of what exactly I meant by urban and if I think urban is a homogeneous entity. When I would speak about adolescents, she made me do exploratory visits to meet a sex educationist, to learn more about adolescents, to learn more about menstruation. She made me spend time in government schools, in tribal ashram shalas in Maharashtra, to chat with adolescents, only to realize that I was not there to study them, I was there to learn from them. And I think this attitudinal shift as a PhD student took me close to the people I was working with. Throughout the journey of conceptualization to interpretation, what I learned from Malavika is that locating social in social epidemiology becomes possible when you ask these right questions. I remember in the first year itself, she had shared a very interesting article with me on causes of the causes. It is written by Professor Michael Marmot, and it argues why structural inequalities need to be intervened. Putting it in the context of my research did not come quickly. I struggled a lot. But slowly, through the process of learning, Malavika showed me why, as a public health researcher, one cannot superficially acknowledge the health disparities, but question the causes of these health disparities and causes of the causes. So developing these students' abilities to question, their ability to find out answers, definitely needs patience as a mentor. Especially, when we are doctoral students, I think we are more or less pretty selfish. We are more concerned about our data. We get frustrated quite easily, as they often say, PhD journey is longer than it appears. We are least interested in those countless revisions which our supervisor wants us to do. And we want our name as an author in that most amazing journal as soon as possible. Nobody else knows how that journey feels like. But in my case, I had a supervisor who was empathetic, who was humane and rational in her approach. I remember it was 2016, I was in the field and I had that evening call. I frustratingly called her, sharing how 3 schools I had visited on that day rejected me an entry when I shared that my study was on menstruation and I wanted to include adolescent boys in my study. I had no patience. I wanted an easy answer from Malavika. Maybe I was expecting she would say, it's okay, Mukta, even if you can get done with 4 or 5 schools. Those of you who know her well will know how she had the knack of gently pushing you in the right direction without really, seeming too overbearing. She was also a hardcore teacher who was able to rightly spot those little teaching learning moments for the student. My frustration that day was one such moment she was able to spot on. I know how frustrating it must be. Are you still standing near the school, Mukta? She asked. Yes, they did not even entertain me. I was almost angry and insulted. Take a deep breath. That was a mantra she would give to all her students. And this is the urban school, co-ed, private, one of those elite kinds, right? Yes, I said calming myself down. It would be nice to have this experience noted down in your field notes. Mukta, think about it. Does it raise any questions in your mind about the combination of urban, private, co-ed kind of elite school disallowing their students from participating in a study because that study is of menstruation? She asked, gently pushing me to revisit my thinking about the binaries of private versus government, urban versus rural, co-ed versus non-co-ed. She wanted me to reflect on the hypothesis that urban was doing better than rural, private were doing better than government, and co-ed had some advantages to non-co-ed. So when I look back at these conversations, I realize how valuable it is for a public health teacher to sow the seeds of these questions and ability to reflect in students' minds. How testing hypothesis is not just a statistical process. It happens through our field reflections. Public health deals with people's everyday experiences of health and illness, and these experiences are hardly any linear in their appearance, and they cannot be broken down into these binaries. How difficult it might appear, Malavika knew that a grounded public health researcher needs to dive deep into these complexities, has to face difficult situations, face those rejections in the field, and has to get away with the comforts of quick, easy, and linear answers. I also have immense respect for Malavika's vocal emphasis on ethical practice and research. When I was working with her as a research associate for 2 years, before I joined her as a PhD student, both of us worked together to draft the IIT Gandhinagar's guidelines and the form that maybe some of you fill in Institutional Ethics Committee. She would jokingly tell her colleagues, I'm the Ma and Mukta is the Masi of IIT Gandhinagar's Institutional Ethics Committee, and both of us would burst into laughter. But I must say that her promise to ethical practice went beyond applying to Institutional Ethics Committee, getting that clearance and getting a consent. She taught me how to reflect on ethical dilemmas at every step of research. This process involved deep, engaging discussions on my positionality, carrying myself in the field, and reflecting my daily experiences during the data collection phase. She was very particular about treating minors with dignity and respect in my study. She would sit in front of me in her office and say, all right, I'm a potential participant in your study. I'm an adolescent girl. Let's try out a mock. She wanted her students to know the true meaning of an informed voluntary consent. Mukta, if I say, no, I don't want to participate in your study, how will you react? If I ask you, I will participate, but what will I gain from it? What will be your answer? If I say, yes, but you can clearly see some hesitancy in my eyes, what will you do? This was the biggest lesson for a budding public health researcher like me on how not to look at the participants as mere data points. Even after fitting those statistical models and finalizing the themes from qualitative data, she insisted on post-data collection visits to the field to meet my participants, to meet their parents, to meet teachers, to share my findings with them and get their feedback. All of these learnings happened in a very democratic environment. Malavika always ensured a safe academic space for me to engage in healthy debates and discussions. I think she would have never, ever appreciated if I would have become her blind follower. Now, when I am a faculty myself, I realize how valuable it is to let your students debate with you, let them be the academic decision makers. Her suggestions, even towards the very final copy of my thesis, would have the first comment, Mukta, here are my suggestions. Please accept if you agree. She never felt insecure while giving her that space to me. She was honest in sharing with me if there was any point on which she did not have much to contribute. She would say, why don't you meet your doctoral studies committee members? Why don't you meet other professors in humanities, social science department? I remember meeting many of them, experts from ethnography, humanities, political science, sociology, for my study on public health. You may not agree with everybody's views, but listen to them and think about their feedback. Honestly, that was not easy for me as a doctoral student. She kept insisting that I need to overcome an urge of giving instant reactions, answers for any question being asked, and being defensive in an academic space. She used to say, I know it's hard, Mukta, but one needs to try. She was a researcher who was eternally curious. And she was equally enthusiastic about Gramvarta impact evaluation programs and all other programs that she was involved in. She was also equally eager to understand Dr. Sankar's work at TINI, Tata Trust. She used to refer to Dr. Menon's work when she used to talk about social determinants of malnutrition. She had immense respect for Mala ma'am's qualitative research. And I know, she herself was so eager to learn those nuances from you, ma'am. Malavika's enthusiasm was beyond the grants, the funding, the prestige which it brought to her as a researcher. She was someone who genuinely engaged in these topics, sought to absorb all those experiences in a way that would enrich her perspective and her understanding of the complex challenges that she was seeking to tackle with her work. I think that is one of the biggest gifts she has given to me and to all her students. The keen balance of empathetic human being and analytical researcher was something which made her what she was. And last but not the least, one of my favorite things I remember about Malavika are the long, sometimes off-the-topic chats we had after our formal meetings related to work. They were done. The topics would range from whether Deepika Padukone or Priyanka Chopra was better in Pinga song, and we would differ and we used to have hard debate on that. Enactment of Thalaivi's dialogues, which all us students watched with her, whether Adhyati was better versus 2 Degree was better. And again, we had different opinions on that. Up to a point where she would share some very strange plan of designing, again, a very strange air conditioner to beat the heat in Ahmedabad. I don't know what those discussions have given to me, but they helped me deepen our bond in a way which I will never be able to articulate, never be able to explain to anybody. In my case, that bond did not end at me alone. She knew nearly every personal milestone that I crossed during my time here. She knew my family. She knew the struggles, the triumphs which we were going through. And most importantly, she was invested and was aware of the impact all of these things have on the student and student's performance. I think I was really fortunate to have somebody who was so well aware of me as a person, to have her encourage me not only in my academics, but all other things that I loved, dance, music, and of course, new Bollywood songs. She was instrumental in bringing many more wonderful friends and colleagues in my life. All of us who are here, and some of us could not attend today's program, but we are like an extended family. And we want to learn, we want to keep that we want to build that same level of care, respect, support, which she has provided to us. Now that she is not among us, we can only seek solace in the fact that she bound us together in a lifelong relationship so effortlessly. She never saw us only as academics or scholars, but she saw us as people who she genuinely loved and cared for. And that, I think, remains her defining quality for me. I found speaking about her really hard. And honestly, I don't feel that I have done justice to what I feel about her and her contribution in my life. She was a scholar, a researcher, a teacher, a mentor. And although she was my PhD supervisor, I will still say she was my very dear, dear friend. I feel that I have imbibed her qualities of asking those right questions, having that curiosity for public health, her ethical approach in teaching, research, practice. And my promise to her is to never let her down. Keep working towards the betterment of people's health. Keep striving to be a good teacher. And I want to live up to that expectation. Thank you.